Hello, I'm Danielle Walker, and I'll be your guide today, presenting the Rogers approach to student-centered learning. I want you to sit back, relax, enjoy, and engage with the video. Since it's going to be on YouTube, you can feel free to add comments in the comment section if you have any questions or comments of the video. Other than that, I look forward to hearing from you and with the supplemental materials toward the end of the presentation. Thank you and enjoy. Today's learning objectives will be to engage in a scenario-driven exercise to develop an understanding of student-centered learning, to understand the history of student-centered learning, to be able to link the similarities between student-centered learning and other learning theories, and to understand what student-centered learning looks like in the classroom. We're going to start first with a scenario. So we are now in the classroom of Miss Brown. She works in higher education, and pretty much her classroom looks like the following. She gives the students work. They achieve their curricular objectives by completing the work, turning their assessments and assignments in a timely fashion. Her students complete activities designed by her, and they respond with positive or negative behavior by the grades that they get on those assignments. Her students are also given other motivators such as extra credit, additional assignments, and their actual grades to motivate them to do better or not to do anything at all. And all of their evaluations are done by the teacher. So as we go on in today's presentation, I want you to keep these things in mind. Feel free to go back to this slide and rewind the scenario in order to get a better understanding of what we are looking to encourage or implement with student-centered learning as we go forward. The background. Where does it come from? Did student-centered learning appear out of thin air? No. Student-centered learning developed from a humanistic perspective. Instead of only focusing on the cognitive development of the learner, student-centered learning also focuses on the development of the affective domain, pretty much what the learner feels. Thus, student-centered learning encompasses the whole person, not just their past experiences and their present situation, but also their perception of those experiences, their present situation, and how they view their future. Although this type of learning theory was derived somewhat from Freud's psychoanalytical approach to human behavior, it does not follow his methodology wholly. Freud believed that behavior is predetermined, while humanists believe it is not. Exactly what is humanism? Humanism is the belief that the learner possesses all potential for growth within themselves. The learner is their own motivation to succeed. Those motivations can stem from the learner's perception of all their experiences and where they ultimately want to be in life. In order to develop these motivations, one must know oneself. Thus, self-actualization is the ultimate goal of student-centered learning. When a learner knows exactly who they are and what they want, they are motivated to find ways to get there. Pictured here is Dr. Carl Rogers, one of the great psychologists that had a lot to contribute to student-centered learning and the approach to student-centered learning. One of his famous quotes is, "A person cannot teach another person directly. A person can only facilitate another's learning." Dr. Rogers' influences on the humanistic orientation are very apparent. In his psychology field, he developed something called client-centered learning, which many equate in education to student-centered learning. Rogers believes that learning only occurs when it is significant, and by significant, he means that the learning must lead to growth and development within the learner. And there are 5 characteristics that describe this type of significant learner from Dr. Rogers. Characteristic number 1 is personal involvement. The affective and cognitive aspects of a person should be involved in the learning event. So number 2 is it must be self-initiated. A sense of discovery must come from within. That's that motivation that we were speaking about in the earlier slides. Number 3 is it has to be pervasive. The learning must make a difference in the behavior, the attitudes, and maybe even the personality of the learner. So something has to change. And number four is it must be evaluated by the learner. So the learner themselves must determine whether or not their experience was meeting that need, that the motivation needed. So, in number five, last but not least, is essence in meaning. When experiential learning takes place, its meaning to the learner becomes incorporated in their total experience. So it's not just what they did, but how they did it, the thought process that they went through while doing it, and everything becomes just a total experience. So, conjunctions with other learning theories. In any classroom, it is important to use a multitude of learning theories to reach the educational goals of each individual student. Even if the instructor chooses the student-centered learning theory as their primary learning model, other theories can closely relate and be used as support to aid in the learning process. In andragogy, it closely relates to student-centered learning in that it holds learners responsible for their own successes, and it also recognizes that motivation has to come from within the learner. It also incorporates the experiences from the learner within their learning process. Student-centered learning also relates to self-directed learning, and that the goal is self-actualization of the learner. In student-centered learning and in student-directed learning, um, they put the keys to learning in the learner's hands. They are the ones who plan, the learners are the ones who carry out, and learners are the ones who evaluate their own learning process. And it also relates to transformational learning with humanistic roots. So each of these learning theories emphasize the importance of learning to the learner as a whole, their motivations, their experiences, what they want. The needs of the learner are always at the forefront. So why is student-centered learning so important? Why should it be implemented? Well, there are a number of reasons why. It reduces disruptive behavior, promotes peer communication, strengthens student motivation, it builds student-teacher relationships, promotes discovery and active learning, and it gives responsibility to the students. When their voice is heard, when the student's voice is heard or the learner's voice is heard, then they pay that much more attention, or they're that much more invested in their own education. So being focused on what the learner needs are paramount for our educational system to survive. If we don't meet the needs of the learner on a consistent basis, we are not only failing ourselves, our learners, but also our future. If done correctly, the learner will become a more developed and self-aware individual. If we had more and more people in today's society that were developed in their own self, within their self, sure of themselves, then we might be even more of a productive society than we already are. So some other drawbacks or differences, if you will, of student-centered learning versus traditional learning, or what we call teacher-centered, is that most understanding cannot or does not occur without direction from the teacher or instructor in teacher-centered learning. And student-centered learning is more supportive of each individual's learning style because it focuses on each individual, each person as an individual versus the whole classroom as a whole. It gives them the ability to draw their own conclusions, to explore beyond the curriculum, and to be trusted with their own progress. So it might be a little difficult for a lot of teachers to give up that power in the classroom to say, hey, we're going to go based off what you want instead of what I want. You still set high expectations. However, those expectations are translated into different things that sort of help the students' needs. Not sort of, it does help the students' needs. All this talk about student-centered learning, what does it really look like in the classroom? Well, first things first, the instructor is not a dictator. The instructor is a facilitator of learning, where it simply guides students to their success, or to stay on track. The instructor can differentiate their instructional models so the learner chooses which method is best suited for their own learning styles, their own needs, and to meet their own motivations. The learner is engaged and responsible for meeting the educational goals by choosing what better suits them. And this includes what they learn, how they learn, and how exactly they are assessed. Um, it keeps the learner curious about learning. Um, it uses different teaching strategies to accommodate individual needs, their intellectual needs, and also their emotional needs. And it meets students' social needs with collaboration, communication, feedback, and peer approval. And it still meets all of the curriculum goals if implemented correctly. So, since the focus is on the learner versus the whole class, the teacher can offer different choices and adaptations that empowers the student to grow. Not so much as you must do this, this is mandated, but empowering, motivating. This can be a bit uncomfortable for teachers that are used to the traditional style of teaching, but for the student to be in a student-centered learning environment, it has to be open, trusting, respectful, dynamic, promote their subjective and objective learning style. It has to both address their cognitive and affective domains. It has to show that they are being facilitated, that they are coming to their own conclusions based off of what's in front of them. And this explorational learning involves the whole child because it is affecting all of those different things. It draws from their emotions, their thoughts, their social skills, their intuition, their perceptions. So the result of student-centered learning, they are able to, the learner is able to become self-confident and also critical thinking. In conclusion, student-centered learning was derived from humanistic orientation. That's its background, where it came from. It encompasses the whole person, the entire person, and addresses the cognitive domain as well as the affective domain, what the student is experiencing, what the learner has went through, what the learner's perceptions are, and all of those things. And it is closely related to andragogy, transformational learning, and self-directed learning theories. But you, as a facilitator, should always have a multitude of learning theories in which to address each student's individual needs. So, student-centered learning's ultimate goals is self-actualization, a more developed, more intuitive, um, a, a more confident learner. And in student-centered learning, the teacher is but a mere facilitator. This job is very, very, very important and very hard. And also in student-centered learning, the learner is responsible for what they learn, how they learn, and how they are assessed. So in closing, being a facilitator is not an easy task, but inside the classroom, what the student does is way more important than what the facilitator does. Is what they can do, what you can teach, or what you can facilitate the student or learner to do for themselves, which is become a more confident, more active, more intuitive learner. Thank you. Just to reiterate the scenario from the beginning of the slide, it was a classroom, Ms. Brown's classroom in higher education, where the students were given work and completed tasks, were given grades as motivators, and the students were always evaluated by the teachers. So I want you to complete the student-centered learning handout and the supplemental materials that were emailed to you, and also email them back to me at danielleewalker84@gmail.com. And please also make sure you list your prospective ways in order to implement student-centered learning in that classroom. And answer the question, what would make this approach so difficult to implement if this were your classroom? I appreciate you for taking your time out and listening to this presentation. I hope that I have addressed everything that you need to know for implementing student-centered learning in your classroom. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me and I will get back with you at my earliest convenience. I want to thank you again so much for being a great, great, great audience. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed.